Good morning, everyone, and a good Yontif, 28th of Sivan, 80 years when the Rabbi came to transform America. So we're in Hemshech Ayin Beis, basically bringing Hemshech Ayin Beis to America. How about that? Another interface. So we are in Hemshech Ayin Beis on page 1214, Aleph Reish Yud Daled. We finished the paragraph, middle of the page, and I'll sum it up. So, the flow, I'll just quickly say it, Ayin Oid, that the concealment itself is revealed as a divine power. That led us into Havaya Yechatu Merivov, the shattering of God's enemies, in contrast to the transformation of Havaya de La'ela, the questions that were asked around that. That led us into a discussion different between Gan Eden and Elam Haba, reward of neshamas alone, neshamas in bodies. Is the reward only in this? Is it only in the future world, or is it also in this world? And that led us to page 1213. What is Gan Eden? Gili of Atzilus in Bria. That's essentially Gan Eden. But the question is, how is that possible? Because to go from Atzilus to Bria, you need a filter. You need a parser. The air goes through a transformation. So to explain that, we're learning Ani Rishon v'Ani Achrin. And we didn't yet get back to where that's going. So we're in the middle of Ani Rishon v'Ani Achrin. I am the first and I am the last. And he explained that Rishon refers to Keser, the beginning of the process, before the process begins, which is Rishon, Keser, Rishon leNetzalim, or Netzel HaRishon, as we discussed. Bottom line is the first emanation, or the first of the emanations, in contrast to Chochmah, which is Reishis, the beginning of the actual process, and Ani Achron is Malchus, the end of the process. That was the last of the spheres, which in turn creates Biyah, all the way to Asiya Gashmi, is the physical world. And what is the verse telling us? It's not just telling us that God is before the process and the end of the process, but also equating Ani Rishon ve'Ani Achron. Just as Malchus creates the physical reality, so too Keser creates the reality of Chochmah, and in that sense there's something in common. To use the words we learned yesterday, that just as the Kamoisha Ani Achron b'chinas HaMalchus Sev Kadan Lahavas Abri Yesh Mayin Kamoy Kain b'Pel Mamish Anikra Asiya Gashmis Kach Mamish Ani Rishon Lahavas HaChochmah Ma'ayim b'chinas Asiya Gashmis Mamish B'Shava Bli Shinoi Klal. So it equates the last level with the first level, that both of them are creating something that is equal. In other words, Chochmah is equal to the product of Keser, is equal to the product of Malchus, equating Chochmah and Asiya, essentially showing how distant they are, the levels above them, meaning that Ani Rishon and Ani Achron. The second thing, Gamzais, it also comes to tell us that Ani Rishon and Ani Achron are wedged one in another. No, it's Seifon b'Tchilason. No, it's Tchilason b'Seifon. The beginning is wedged in the end, and the end in the beginning. That there's a deep connection between Keser and Malchus. And that's what we're going to learn now. What is the connection? Where this is going, we shall see. You know, there's always surprises. There's a drama unfolding here. Clearly, this is going to help us explain Gan Eden, Atzilus, and of course, the bigger picture of the whole interface, which we already are seeing points of it. Keser, Malchus, these are all interfaces between the divine and existence. So though Chochmah is very distant from Asiya Gashmis, but in comparison to its source, there's something similar between the two. Because if not, what is the verse saying? I am the first and I am the last? What is God trying to say with that? Why do we need to know that God is the first? You could say, okay, he's the first. But what do you need to know that he's the last? So clearly there's more going on here. Last meaning that he is the creator of the last levels as well, the lower levels. And remember also, Ani, I should have added, is the letters Ayin. So it's Ayin, the bittul. he says before that, Ayin the Keser, the source of Chochmah, which is Yesh, and Malchus is also an Ayin, Ani, Ayin of the worlds of the Yesh of Biyah. And since we're already reviewing, before that he said that they're both a Nekuda. Chochmah and Keser are both Nekuda, they're both a point. The difference is, does the point have shape, like a letter Yud, or has no shape at all, it's just a point? Meaning just the minimal, literally the minimal point. Okay. That's the review. If anybody wants any clarity about what we've learned, I'll be happy to give that. And if not, we'll just continue learning inside. Okay, good. So as I pointed out, this is developing a theme. We're going to get back to Gan Eden, just in case if you want to have a bookmark. Gan Eden is going to get back to the bottom of page 1218. So we're still on 1214. 4 more pages. The bottom of 1218, he goes back, and now we'll understand Gan Eden. However, just keep in mind, even though this may seem off the topic, it's not. The Rebbe Rashab has already proven himself that he's very broad thinker, and he's bringing a lot of topics, and he's going to tie it all together, and it'll all be very clear, except it's the long, short road. That's the key. It's not a short approach, because he wants to give us the comprehensive picture. Remember, we spoke Lahavin Ha'inyan, the whole inyan of it. So it'll be worth it. It'll be worth the patience, even though right now it seems like that he's talking about another subject, but as I said, we'll tie it all together. And I'm here to help the process along. The tour guide, if you wish. Okay. Va'inyanhu. The inyan of what? He's going to now explain this Keser Malchus relationship, which says the following. Va'inyanhu. The inyan in this is in the Yedua, because now it's known, the Pirish Malchuscha Malchus Kol Elam. So this is a prayer, a verse that we say, very popular. Malchuscha, your kingship, your kingdom, God's kingdom. Malchus Kol Elam. So you have your kingship is the kingship of all the worlds. So it's like a double. Why do we need to say it twice? Why don't you just say Malchuscha Kol Elam? Or Melech Al Kol Elam, you're the king of the world, of the entire world. So Malchuscha Malchus Kol Elam. He's going to explain what that means. Chassidus, this is you may have learned it in other Maimarim. There are different interpretations, but they're very connected. So he's going to explain, what does this mean? So there's a lot of meanings here. First of all, the Chol Iker U'Mokir Isavus Kol Elamim. The entire primary and source of creation of the worlds in the way God created the structure. Remember, the source is always God. God is the creator. There's one Beida Elam. But the way he created it in a process, as we've discussed many, many times, that to make sense of it. It's not there's a creator somewhere and just poof, yesh ma'ayin, and we have existence. Because God wants a relationship with this existence, he created it in a way that we can understand the process, and we can also retrace the steps and reconnect with the process, so to speak. So just as we don't have an architect just says, oh, I want a building, and a building comes out of nowhere, we know there's a process. It doesn't go that way. It doesn't work that way. Even though God could do anything he wants, but even like the creation of a child, there's a conception, and the cells multiply and multiply again, and it takes 9 months of gestation and process until you have a fully developed fetus and child that could be a viable, independent life, and then it emerges from its mother's womb. God couldn't make it that upon conception there should be an immediate child, or you plant the seed in the ground. Why does it have to take time till it blossoms? Because everything is a process that itself is part of the godly plan, and the process makes it something that's sensible and logical to us, at least according to the seichel that we have. So what's the process of how the worlds are created? So there's many details to it, but he's focusing now on that the Ikar Mokir Savas Kol Elam is v'hachayis shalahem, and their vitality, the energy that sustains them, hu mebchinas malchuscha dafka, is specifically a dafka from the level of malchuscha, your level, your kingship. In other words, in the context of spheres, even though there's a Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus is the place that we associate the source of creation. Just to simplify it, not allow it to be too esoteric and abstract, in Ageres HaKedesh, Chof, Siman Chof, the famous Ageres HaKedesh, where he talks about what the Alter Rebbe wrote just a little while before he passed away. So he says, Malchus is Eretz. So though God created many creations, the sky, the earth, but which part of the earth, of existence gives birth to vegetation? It's the earth. Eretz is the level of Malchus. So Chochmah itself is wisdom, but wisdom doesn't give birth. It gives birth to emotions and so on, but actually give birth to a plant. With the third day of creation, when God said, Teitzi Eretz Desha, that may the earth produce vegetation, that's the power of the earth, and earth in Gashmius is what Malchus is in Ruchnius. And in human beings, Malchus is Nekeva. So though the Zohar, the male, provides the seed, which is Zah, like we learned the Shemesh, the sun, but where does the child develop? It's in the mother's womb, just like the seed develops in the earth. Just wanted to put it, he's not going to say all this here, but another Maimorim, he talks about it in more detail. Just to make it a little more, not just, as I said, abstract and esoteric, something that we can relate to. So we see that this lowest level, Eretz, because you would think, you know what? Things should grow in heaven. Heaven is superior to, Shemayim is superior to Eretz. Why didn't God make that heaven gives birth to things? Like, in other words, let's say plants would fall like the rain does. Yeah, I know it would look weird, but it wouldn't be weird if that's the way it was created. You know, lechem min hashamayim. The man came from above, like the tal, the dew. But that's not God. He made it that the lowest level, Eretz, should sprout and give birth and cause things to grow. So that's Malchus. In Ruchnius, Malchus Chodavke is what he calls the Iker Moker Yisavas Kol HaElemis V'Achaya Shalahem. So Malchus channels all the spheres, the higher spiritual spheres, which are all the divine attributes. In other words, God has wisdom. The world is created with Chachma Bina Das and with Chesed Gvur Teferes. But where is the creation actually develop, and what produces it? It's Malchus. So Malchus is channeling all the higher faculties or the higher attributes, and that's what creates. Now, what level is this? So we know Malchus, there's Malchus of Atzilus, there's Malchus of Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. Every level has Malchus. Every world, every dimension has a Malchus within it. Where's the original Malchus? So you may recall the concept of Malchus the Ein Sof. Malchus of Ein Sof, even though it's not a sphere there in the technical sense of the word, it's the 10 hidden spheres before the Tzimtzum. And the last of them, if you may recall, is where God is ready to create, and that's where the Tzimtzum will emerge. And follow that will be the Kav and creation. So the original Malchus of all Malchus, Malchus Kol Elamim, as we'll see, is Malchus of Ein Sof. Now I'm elaborating because the Rebbe Rashab here is just stating it as facts, but he's relying that either we learned it earlier, but the truth is in Ayin Beis itself, this was elaborated upon plenty in volume 1 and in volume 2 and now in volume 3. So there's a lot of what he's saying here that needs more details. Also keep in mind, maybe have noticed it, that I'm giving more explanation here than I usually do, because the third volume, remember the Rebbe Rashab did not go over a second time or a third time. It's not my Morim, so the Rebbe Rashab did not break it into individual discourses. He definitely didn't break it into chapters and summaries. So not to suggest, God forbid, that this isn't all absolutely clear, but you could see that it may also be not have the Rebbe Rashab's second and third edits. So in some places, it's very obvious that he wrote it, absolutely accurate, but essentially did not spell everything out, either relying or had he gone over it again, he may have elaborated more. But we can't guess. So I'm just taking the liberty to just explain things more based on earlier Maimar. If anybody wants to know where these topics I spoke about earlier, I try to refer to it every time. So as you've seen, and if you want to look in earlier places, but suffice to right now that Malchus of Ein Sof. So he's going to say now, for who b'chinas Malchus the Ein Sof. That's the word when we use, not Malchus of Atzilus, or Atzilus, I should say, Atzilus the Proteus, in microcosm. It's actually Malchus of Atzilus the Klolos, a macrocosm. Because Atzilus the Klolos is usually the levels of the before the Tzimtzum. So Malchus of Ein Sof, Atzmei, Shenikra Malchuscha Mamish. So when you say Malchuscha, you could say God is a melech. You could say Malchus. Malchuscha, it means it's your Malchus. So every word in Hebrew is very precise, but especially Chassidus, the emphasis of Malchuscha means it's yours, means it's completely in your domain. So in other words, Malchus of Atzilus is also God's Malchuscha. But like we learned earlier about when we say, what did we say with the Lashon? He said, this is Hu Atzmei. I forgot the look. So there are times that a word indicates Malchuscha. In other words, it's in your domain, which means that before the Tzimtzum, it's not yet part of existence. So Malchuscha Mamish, B'chinas HaMalchus, the Atzmus Eir Ein Sof. Is the Malchus that's in the core of Eir Ein Sof, and Atzmus Eir Ein Sof, in comparison to everything that will happen after the Tzimtzum, before the Tzimtzum, as we discussed, is generally called Atzmus Eir Ein Sof, because it's not so much an Eir that's relating to existence, even though in the Eir before the Tzimtzum, relatively speaking, it is, but compared to the Eir that will come afterwards, it's called the Malchus as it's within the God consciousness, the divine consciousness, which does not yet have room for existence. That's why you need a Tzimtzum. So we're talking about the divine energy. In that divine Oyer, Ein Sof, God begins to process of first desiring, or we said consideration, deliberation, determination. Then the desire becomes something more specific, starts envisioning existence. Now he's going to say this, but I'll just give a little more context as well. This level of Malchus of Ein Sof generally is the level of Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, where God is envisioning and essentially allocating the resources before he's actually creating, in his own so-called the divine Oyer. And we're not to remember, we're not ever talking about Atzmus itself. We're talking about the Oyer of Atzmus. There, he's beginning to envision existence. So it'd be like a person who wants to build a building, a structure, but he's not even beginning to build it. The artist is envisioning it. So within the artist's mind, there's that aspect, that Malchus of Ein Sof. And generally, the envisioning is the 10 hidden spheres. If you want another reference, when it says Bereish for Menusa de Malka, this is a language from the Zohar, 15a, the beginning of Zohar Bereishis. Bereish for Menusa de Malka means in the beginning of the desire of the king, or of his Rishus. Her Menusa is interpreted two ways. So, B'Malka, remember the word is Malka, Golif Galifu B'Tehiri Allah. So you've heard this expression. He engraved, Golif Galifu, he engraved in the Tehiri Allah, in that higher light. In that higher light. And what did he engrave? He engraved the image of the 10 hidden spheres, including the letters, but they're all within that divine energy. The Tzimtzum will conceal that energy, allow the letters to emerge, but they're concealed, the Rishimu. And then will be the Kav, the thin ray, the line that will begin flowing as the teacher begins to, now an energy, Er HaGvul, that will enter, will create and shape existence. Just to put it in context. So this is Malchuscha. Malchus, the Atzma sense of Malchuscha. Ukamoy. And like when we say, At Shalei Nivra Elam, Hayahu Shmoi Bilvad. So here again, very brief. Rebbe Rashab is not elaborating. So we learned the Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar says that At Shalei Nivra Elam, before the world was created, or till the world was created, was Hayahu Shmoi Bilvad. It was only him and his name. So the question is, what does this name mean? To say only God existed, yes, there was no world. Of course, we're talking about conceptually in time, conceptual time. So Nivra Elam refers to the Tzimtzum, creation of everything. Elam, sometimes it says Achalei Netzal, meaning not just the creation, but also the emanations. But here he's using Nivra Elam. So what's Shmoi? So it says, Shmoi Bilvad, Shmoi B'chinas Malchus. So not only was the divine energy there was already the envisioning of the existence that would come. So that's Malchus, Shoya Shmoya Belvad. If you may recall, in the end of volume 2, he spoke about Hu Shmoy, relatively at length. And that's what he's saying here. Hu Shmoy Belvad. Okay. But you see, these 4 lines right here is packed with so much information that if you don't spell it out, it's very easy to just like, what are we talking about here? That's why I'm elaborating what this level is. Okay. Now, short parentheses, ubeprotius. When you break it down in specifics, yesh b'zeh madregas. In this itself, there are levels. In other words, it's not just Malchus Shmoy, there's levels. Ach b'chlolos ub'chinas Malchus the Ein Sof. So he's hinting now to all the levels I just mentioned before. There's the Eir, Etzema Eir, which is just about the reflection of the source. There's the Eir that begins to become a conscious type of Eir that will ultimately become the Eir where the desire will emerge, and then the desire itself into an actually being drawn to it and the details, to the point that we call it Eir Hashayach Le'elamus. It's still Eir Ein Sof, but within the Eir Ein Sof itself, it's already considering existence. Considering. That doesn't mean there's existence yet. They'll need the Tzimtzum and more to come. So, but generally speaking, he says it's all encompassed in Malchus of Ein Sof, though there are breakdown of levels, which of course explains if you ask the question, where are those levels? So right now it's not relevant to go into the levels, but that's why he qualified and said, which is very good to hear because that helps clarify. And when we say Malchus Ein Sof, sometimes you're talking about all the general levels before the Tzimtzum. Okay. Now here's the Malchuscha Malchus Kalelam. Malchuscha is Malchus of Ein Sof as God's envisioning. Who mocked the Malchus the Chol Elamus Shabishtalshus. And this the Malchus of Ein Sof within the Ein Sof envisioning or relating to existence that will come, that becomes the source of the Malchus in each world. The Abiyah. In the Ishtalshus of Atzilus Bri Yitzir Asiyah, there's a Malchus in each one of them. Where do they get their energy from? Where are they rooted? In Malchus of Ein Sof. Kemalchus the Ak, like the Malchus of Ak, Adam Kadmon. Now you can say, why does he include that in Abiyah? Because Adam Kadmon is Bria in macrocosm. Malchus the Atikemen, the higher level in Kesser, also has a Malchus. The Abba Ve'ima, Chachman Bina has a Malchus. The Zah, and Zah has a Malchus. Add Malchus the Atzilus to Malchus, all the way to Malchus of Atzilus, or Malchus de Bria. And Malchus of Bria, add Malchus the Asiyah. Of course, he also includes Yitzir, he just doesn't mention it. But basically, every Malchus, in whatever level you're going to talk about, from Ak, Atik Yemen, Chachma Bina, Zah, Malchus Atzilus, Malchus de Bria, and Malchus da Asiyah, Shehu Madrega Yesha Tachtene, which the Malchus da Asiyah is the lowest level. Lahaves Elam Hashafel Shalanu, that creates our lowest or lowliest of world. All of them are rooted in Malchus of Ein Sof in Malchuscha. Zeu Pirish Melech Malchi Hamlochim. So just like we say Malchuscha Malchus Kalelomim, we also say on the Eibush the Melech Malchi Hamlochim. Why don't you just call him a Melech? Melech Malchi Hamlochim means he's the king of the kings of the kings. So this is the meaning of the word Melech Malchi Hamlochim. Shalamayla. Melech Malchim Shalamayla Dabiyah. No, let me read it differently. Pirish Melech Malchi Hamlochim Shalamayla. This is the Melech Malchim of that, the Malachim of Abiyah. There's a Malchus in each of these levels. That's why it's Malachim plural. The Malchus of Atzilus and Bria, Yitzir, Asiyah, and all the levels. Shakol Nimshach Mebchinas Malchuscha. So that's the Melech Malchi Hamlochim. So the Malachim are the Malchus and throughout all Ishtalshlus. And like Malchuscha, Malchus Kol Elamim, the root of them all, the source of them all is the Malchuscha, Malchus of Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. Which means what? It goes back, what is the level of Malchuscha? V'hainu, Masha'ola b'machshava ha'atzmius. What is Malchus? That what arose in his core thought, which is referring to the divine consciousness before the Tzimtzum. So what arose? Ano emlech. I shall rule. The Ratzon of Ano emlech, which is an expression from Kabbalah, from Zohar and other places. That Ratzon arose before the Tzimtzum, and that's the root of all the Malchus in each part of Ishtalshlus going downward, all the way down to Malchus of Asiya.
Excuse me, is that considered?
Shazehu, one second. Shazehu, I'm going to stop in a second. I just want to finish 4 more words. Shazehu b'chinas Malchus de Ein Sof. That is Malchus of Ein Sof. Now, you could ask a question, but I'd rather just let me give me an explanation, and then I'll stop for questions, because then he starts with Beer to Inyan. So here's the idea. You could say, why do you need all these levels? What's wrong with just having Malchus of Ein Sof? Then comes a Tzimtzum, a Kav, and that's that. But it doesn't work that way. Because, like I mentioned with the example of the chief of staff, the king rules over a large empire. It has millions of people, hundreds of cities and municipalities. You can't just say there's one king and he rules over. There has to be leaders in each of these communities. You have governors and mayors and different parts, because that's the way you really govern properly. They all answer to the king of the nation, of the empire. So basically, when you're dealing with a structure like existence as we know it, so each world is a different city, is a different domain, and it needs its own Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet, Netzach, and Malchus. It needs its Melech. The Malchus that becomes a source for the next, the Malchus of Atzilus becomes the king, the Keser, and the king of Bia, of Bria. The Malchus of Bria becomes the Keser, the king of Yetzirah. So each world in microcosm has its so-called leader, and they all source from and originate from the Malchus Kol Elamim. So essentially, you now have a type of not just delegation, but also a type of control that at each level, let's talk in Aveda, we can't jump to Malchus of Ein Sof. You can't just go straight to the highest level. We need to go to Malchus that we can relate to. And then you can grow and go from there higher and higher. But the fascinating thing, they're all connected to the original, how God envisioned it. And then each Malchus essentially focuses on the department or the city or the domain that it is building, in the case of Atzilus, Ambri, Yetzirah, Asiyah. So that's what he said right now. So this is all about Malchus, the Ani Achron that we spoke about, and it hasn't obviously finished the topic. But I'll stop here if anybody has any questions. Go ahead.
I'm always getting confused. He said in the beginning, before he had a Ratzon, he had a Ratzon to have a Ratzon, so to speak. This level of Malchus is on the beginning.
Is not, no, the Malchus is at the end of that process, not the beginning.
Okay.
Malchus is once already. It always works this way. You always start with Ratzon. You want a house. Then you start planning it, envisioning it. Malchus is the end of the process of the envisioning. It's when you've already in your mind, the Ratzon has been translated into a plan, into Shiur Atzmei B'Koyach, the envisioning and the allocating of resources. And then comes the actual building, the actual implementation. Okay. Anybody else wants to ask anything or question, clarity? Okay. So now, Ubira Inyan. And here's the explanation of the Inyan. Dini Yadua, because now it's known, Tisavis elam is biyah. The creation of the worlds of biyah. Bria Yetzira Asiya. Who mebchinas Malchus. It's from the level of Malchus. Dafka. Mebchinas Malchus Dafka. Specifically from Malchus, the loy mishare hamidus. Not from the other emotions, meaning chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, ched, yesed, which are called zah. That doesn't mean they're not a driving force, that they are also part of the process. But the actual creation is through Malchus. Ukunmoishin is barely ill. So I'd explain it, but he's going to explain why. Like it was explained earlier, the Mahamidus al Yenis, from the supernal emotions, or from the supernal emotions, meaning from the higher emotions, meaning the emotions in the higher worlds, lo yehoye efshar liyas yisavas elmas. L'fishehem bebchinas kiruv. From that level alone could not bring the creation of the worlds, because they're in a state of, they're close. Let me explain what means kiruv. Emotions, by definition, are about relationship. Like chesed, you love somebody, there has to be a relationship between the one who has chesed and the one whose chesed is directed toward. Same thing, gvura, teferes. Midas, by definition, is a state of kiruv. Moichin, for example, is not that way. You could be moichin, you could sit alone, isolated, and use your mind. As a matter of fact, another person would probably disrupt and disturb the process. Not probably would. So midas are in a state of kiruv. But because they're so intense, if the creation came from that, the creation could not be an independent entity. Let's see inside how he's going to explain it. I want to make sure that what I'm saying is correct, because there's different ways this is explained. So let's read inside. He's giving an example now for the midas. Like, for example, the midas, we're talking God's attributes. Chesed of Gevurah Tefer. Keiches Adam, Keiches HaNefesh. The faculties of the soul, they are Giluyim HaNefesh. They're expressions, revealed expressions of the Nefesh. The Nefesh is indivisible. It's just a core energy force, but it has the capacity and is the of the faculties that it energizes. So the faculties themselves, whether it's whatever faculty, is a revelation of Kamoi, Midas HaChesed, the Midas HaChesed, the attribute of kindness, of love and kindness. Hubchinas Gili Ma Nefesh, it's a Gili from the Nefesh. It's not in a state that's beyond, like the Nefesh itself is in a state of no revelation. You know you have a Nefesh, but it's not revealed. Shanefesh Mizgal B'midazu. The Nefesh gets revealed through this midas. So when a person shows kindness and love to another, or more important, when you feel kindness and love and attracted to another, essentially the Nefesh is expressing itself through this midah. It's only one midah. There are other midas too, but it's one of them. So when you are attracted and drawn to someone in kindness and love, essentially the Nefesh is being revealed through that attribute, like a channel that connects you to the other. Ukamoi came the midas hagvura v'atiferes, and the same thing with gvura and tiferes. Now, gvura should not be mistaken to see as being withdrawing from someone. Gvura is just another attribute. It means, for example, discipline. So in your relationship with another, it's measured and disciplined. Or Gvura could also be being repelled. You're repelled by somebody. So either way, it's still an emotion, and it's an expression of the nefesh, except in chesed, the emotions is going this way, attraction, and in Gvura is going the other direction. But it's still a reaction, an emotional reaction. And Tiferes, compassion, rachamim. So they're all basically what he wants to say is a gilui from the nefesh. Okay? So in other words, if these koiches are dormant and they're not active, in other words, you're not feeling any particular emotion, there's still in the nefesh, but they're not yet. They haven't emerged. It's like when you're asleep, these faculties are not functioning in any conscious and expressed way. That doesn't mean they can't. It just means right now practically. So essentially what he's saying is the midas, like the koiches hanefesh, are giluyim of the nefesh and a gili. Now, where's he going? And the same thing is with the faculty of intelligence. It's yet another gili nefesh. It's how the nefesh expresses itself, the spirit, the soul, through a cognitive approach, through meichin, through seichel, through understanding, through conceiving, understanding, comprehending.
When you say Derek Marshall, are you really saying an example of this? Not really like a marshal, which is like
a marshal means the faculties of the human being is an example for the divine faculties and attributes.
Right. Okay.
He's coming to explain why Malchus is the specific force that creates and not the higher midas. So he's saying the midas are gili of essentially the divine in Atzilus. So an example for that is the koiches hanefesh, which are the human faculties, which are an expression of a revelation of the human soul. This is very common. In Tanya, he says it clearly: the 10 faculties of the human nishtalshul evolved from the 10 divine faculties and attributes. So they serve as a great example for understanding godly attributes. You want to understand God chesed, you start with understanding your own chesed. Okay. These are all, whether the midas that he mentioned, chesed, gvur, teferes, all the midas, and said they're all giluyim mamish ma nefesh. They're actually revelations and expression, revealed and tangible expressions, palpable expressions of the soul. Remember, when a person, God forbid, does not have a soul, when there's the body and soul separate, the faculties stop functioning. There are no faculties. So it's not coming from the body. The body is the container, you can say the appliance through which these faculties manifest. In other words, if you didn't have eyes, ears, if you didn't have all the kalim, so the neshama, the faculties of the nefesh would remain unactualized. But soul and body, they come together, but the faculties themselves are revelatory forces, essentially channels of energy coming from the nefesh in different fashions, very much as it is with godliness. The godly energy is shapeless, but God chose to manifest through chesed and gvura and teferes and so on. Okay. And the nefesh, the spirit, reveals itself through these faculties. It conceives with the power of intelligence of the mind. In other words, it does kindness through the midah of chesed. So you can almost say that the midas and the koiches are essentially instruments of the soul. The soul wants it expresses itself, its chesed through the midah of chesed. Same thing with seichel. It's an interesting expression. Mischased b'midas hachesed. Ulechein, and for this reason, these faculties are called nikra b'shem tikunin. In Pasach Eliyahu that we say on Friday, from Tikunei Zeyar, he calls them tikunin, like tikunim. Now, tikun means repair, but tikun also means ornaments. When you say jewelry, one of the words for jewelry and adornments and ornaments is also tikkun. Beautifying something is also a form of tikkun. So it's not always in the context of repair, it's also ornaments, expressions. Says that's why they're called tikkunim shanefesh mistakenes behem. Because the nefesh essentially beautifies itself through that. It doesn't mean the nefesh repairs itself through them. That's not what he means here. The nefesh basically is like, why do you wear jewelry? Why does one wear jewelry? Because it's not, the jewelry doesn't replace the beauty of the person, but it expresses the beauty of the person. So essentially, when you do, whether a person wears jewelry or you design something and you make it look beautiful, like it says, make a mezuzah, a beautiful mezuzah, a beautiful sefer Torah, dirana, a beautiful home. The home itself can be also not beautiful, and it's still a home, it's a shelter. But beauty essentially expresses the beauty within. That's why it says, dirana marcheves daite shel adam. A beautiful home expands the mind of a person because it draws you out, it draws out. So essentially he's saying that the nefesh adorns itself with these faculties and expresses itself through them. Hainu shemiskatesh shetes. That's the word, kishutit, keshet. Miskashetes umisyafa behem. He's exactly using, miskashetes is kishutin are essentially jewelry and beauty. He beautifies, and miskashetes, he adorns and beautifies. The soul adorns and beautifies itself, bohem, with these faculties. She'uhu inyan hagilui. This is a form of gilui. So it's like when a person does something that, sometimes you see makeup, for example. Okay. I know these are more feminine examples, but we are talking, so be it. But the point is, when you put on makeup properly, I'm not talking about something that is obnoxious or disgusting. It really is meant to bring out the natural beauty in the person. So the makeup enhances and brings it out. It doesn't replace it. We're not talking about makeup that recreates a face. If you want to accentuate a certain feature, so there are different ways you do that, just like when you paint something or you color something. We're not talking about coloring, distorting, or covering up, but actually expressing its inner beauty that sometimes needs to be brought out through these methods. So he's saying the nefesh, mistakenes, and it's beautified and adorned and expressed in a revealed way. The faculties express the beauty and beautification of the soul. So when you see a person, let's say, being very kind and loving, the soul is essentially the force behind it. It's like the soul is now expressing that kindness and love. So it's a beautification of the soul, expressing the beauty of the soul. And the same with other faculties. Yeah, it's not so common in Chassidus, this detailed explanation like this, but the Rebbe Rashab is bringing this into the picture. And he says like this, okay. Shahu inyan hagili. In the language of Chassidus, this is called gili. That the keiches are megala the nefesh. Because that's where he talks about the tikkun. Like he says in Teira from the Alter Rebbe, in the Maimer Vayera, the beginning Vayera, there's a Maimer Pasach Eliyahu, and that's where he speaks about this. He's referring us to there. Now, that's the Midas. What about Malchus? Aval Midas HaMalchu HaMelucha, the Midah of Melucha v'hisnasus, the Midah of Melucha and Hisnasus. Let's explain what that means. Melucha and Hisnasus is also an emotional faculty. It's the emotional faculty that feels kingship, dignity, or furthermore, to feel like there's certain sovereignty, the need to be a leader. We're not talking about arrogant now. We're talking about a sense of being above something beneath it. Now, I need to qualify this, because as soon as we say that, we right away reminded of all the negative and ugly associations with kings and queens who decided that they are higher and greater than others. But we're talking about a melech hamiti, a true melech, like David HaMelech, not someone who just has subjects and subjugates them, but a true melech that is humble. Vahi b'shur melech, Moshe Rabbeinu, David HaMelech, the humblest people. And their kingship is not because they want to dominate and control others. It's not about control and influence. It's because they fundamentally are of a higher level. They're more godly people. And there's a certain sense of that, not an arrogant way, in a humble way, of, I don't want to use the word superiority, of use of remamus, they're exalted. They're a person whose stature is just of a higher quality. And again, I'm trying to be critical to point. We're not talking about someone who's vying for power. We're talking about someone who fundamentally is of a higher level. So this midah of melucha is the opposite of the other midas, as he's going to say. It's not about a revealed expression. It's actually about being removed from. So he says like this. So this midah of melucha ve'isnasus, which is an exalted state, ein ze gili ma'nefesh. This is not in the form of a gili from the nefesh. It comes from the nefesh as well.
Atzmi. Isnasus atzmi.
Where do you see isnasus atzmi?
That's what he's saying.
The next line. We didn't get there yet.
Oh, sorry.
Hamalucha v'isnasus ein ze gili ma'nefesh, ki im bo b'chinas koyach nivdal ma'nefesh. It comes as a separate faculty. Chesed is the soul is expressing itself through love. But Malucha, what's the expression? How is the soul expressing itself through Malchus? See, because you see, first of all, from the point of view of others, Malchus does not reach like Chesed to another. Malchus is actually an exalted state. It's above others. And also from the Nefesh, it's not coming as a gili of the Nefesh, it's coming as a separate Kayach Nivdal. He's going to explain. The Gam Hisnasus Atzmi. So let me explain what that is. We learned in volume 1 that there's 2 types of Hisnasus. One is a person who feels higher, like Haman. He felt a Hisnasus and he wanted everyone to bow to him. And in the Maimah we learned there that it's not Hisnasus Atzmi, it's Hisnasus that is based on, I need someone to feel that I'm special. It actually comes from insecurity, as what he explained there. I'll soon apply it to here. And then Hisnasus Atzmi means has nothing to do with someone else valuing you. You're fundamentally on a different state. It's just like a human being, without any arrogance. You know that you're in a higher state than, let's say, a lowly insect. Not because God didn't create the insect, it's because you're in a different state. Just like a wise person senses, and again, even without any arrogance, that he's smarter than another person. Now, this doesn't mean he has to gloat or he goes around bragging about it. But, seichel, a person with seichel understands more than a person without seichel. A parent and a child. You see a child playing and doing something nonsense. The parent knows that you know better. Again, not in an arrogant way. It's just a sense of hisnasus. So there's hisnasus atzmi, which just comes from your fundamental state of being on a higher level. Hisnasus not atzmi is as you relate to others. Now, Haman, of course, is klipa. That is the hisnasus of klipa. I just used it as an example. But even in Elikus, you have 2 levels. We learned hoid v'hodar. Remember? Hoid v'hodar. So there's hadar malchus and there's hoid malchus. So we learned the one is Rev Am Hadras Melech. That when there's a lot, Rev Am, when there's a multitude, that's the king's covet. Hadras Melech, the beauty of the king. But it's dependent on, you see the king comes out and he has hundreds of thousands or thousands of people who adore him. So Rev Am is Hadras Melech. But then there's Hoid Melech. And Hoid is even when he's sitting in his private inner sanctum, in his inner chamber, and there's no one there. And no one is showing any even honor to him. He's fundamentally on a higher level. So Chassidus explains that Hoid and Hodar are like Arich and Atik. That was explained in volume 1. And I believe in volume 2, he explained that the Oyer, as it relates to existence, that's Hadras Melech. That's the Melech as he relates, a Melech B'loi Am. He relates to a nation, but he's still above them. That's Hisnasus. Hisnasus Atzmi is even higher, where he's not even in a state where he's relating to anyone, just fundamentally in a level higher. When it comes to godliness, it's easier to understand. Is God greater than existence? Or is God so great that it doesn't have to, doesn't have to bring out the greatness of God?
Sounds like Hoid is more like Atik and Hada is more like Arich, the opposite of the way it was just expressed.
What did you say?
Said Hoid was more like, I think you said that, Hide was more like Arach. I would think it'd be
I
more
said
like
Hoyd is
Atik.
Atik and Hadras is Arik.
I know. I would think it.
That's what I said.
I thought being alone is higher because that's more fundamental.
Atik is being alone, and Arich relates to existence.
Yeah. So that's how it is being alone. No.
I said that, and Hadras is the lower.
Yeah.
level.
No, I thought you said the opposite. I'm sorry. Ayin Melech is hard.
Well, I didn't say that. If I said it, it was a slip of the tongue. That's exactly what I meant. Okay. So he's saying, Avol. He says like this. So I feel gam hasnasus atzmi hu bechinas koyach nivdal. Why is he saying gam hasnasus atzmi? Because even the fundamental state where you're in a state of exalted state on its own is also koyach nivdal. Because you could argue that it's a koyach nivdal when you're relating to others, because you're somewhat a step away from your nefesh, and on your own, the isnasus is part of who you are. But even there, it's a koyach nivdal, because isnasus does not reveal any revelation of the soul. It just reveals that you're in a higher state. It doesn't reveal, like chesed is an expression. Hisnasus is not an expression. It's just a state of being. So it's different than all the midas. That's seemingly this pshat of what he means here. Let's continue. We'll see where he's going. Okay, koyach nivdal. Ulechein kol hakeches hein ili benefesh. And that's why all the keches, and that's why you understand now why he spoke about beautification. All the keches are an expression.
This is also an expression of the nefesh.
Listen, I'm middle of teaching. 1 second. I'm middle of explaining. So all the keches are the ili benefesh. They're expressing in a very revealed way the qualities of the soul, of love, of intelligence. Like we said, it's a beautification. It's an expression of the soul's power and beauty. Ili benefesh, lefi shehein his galus min nefesh, because they are actually a revelation from the soul. The soul is showing you its qualities. Chesed, gvura, teferes, etc. Mashenkin, that's the fishen galus min. Mashenkin b'midas hamalucha. Mashenkin b'midas hamalucha. Midas hamalucha, what is it expressing? Midas hamalucha, as I said, is a state of being that this person is a melech. You may not even know anything about his personality. You don't know about his chesed or gvura or teferes or his intelligence. You know he has it all, but melucha is not about an expression in a revealed way of what the individual is. It's just a state of an exalted hisnasus, elevated state that this level is. So in other words, to put it in, let's put it, it's actually easier to understand about God than it is about us. And you'll see in a moment why. When you see that God is doing, you say, Kilo Elam Chazde. Hoydal Hashem Kitev, Kilo Elam Chazde. You see God's chesed in your life. He gives you life, health, family, parnosa. Chesed. Every day we acknowledge God's chesed. This is expressing God's kindness, and as a result, you appreciate God. You appreciate God through His chesed, or the same thing with gvura, and teferes, and seichel. You learn Torah, you appreciate God's wisdom. Even the study of the universe. The Rambam says, Ketzad, how do you come to love and awe of God? Study the universe. In other words, the art reveals to us the artist's attributes. But what about God's Malchus? The God's Malchus doesn't reveal anything about God. It's just saying that God is beyond us. He's our king. Tamlichuni aleichem. We crown him as our king. We're recognizing that he's beyond us. That's not a gilui that we relate to. It's actually a gilui that tells us that God's beyond us. We're not suggesting it isn't a powerful experience. That's not what we're asking. But it's not one of revelation. It's one actually of distance. So the faculties of God, basically, Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Vurta, till Malchus, reveal expressions of Elikus. And Malchus reveals the distance, or the Ein Arech, the infinite distance of the divine. And all you know is that he's a melech. He's my melech. He's my ruler. Kabul malchusai. Kabbalah shel malchus shamayim. Now, the truth is we need both. We need the Giluyim to appreciate God, and we also need to know the Malchus. But in context of what he wants to go to here, Malchus is a very different type of faculty. That's why by Malchus you say it doesn't have anything on its own, because Malchus is not defined by anything. It's defined just being beyond. It's not a state of expression, it's a state of bittul or a state of being. So it's easier to understand with God. Now, applying it to the human being, if someone appreciates you, is it because what you do for them and your relationship with them, or because they appreciate you for who you are? That would be the difference between the first is they appreciate your faculties or your expressions and your gifts, if you wish, your beauty. And the second is they appreciate you for who you are. It has nothing to do with any of your expressions. Just you are someone special, period. Despite of what you are accomplishing or performing or revealing of yourself. So Malchus is actually, in that sense, the essence of self-esteem. What does that mean? That you're valuable not because what you do for others or what you accomplish and what you perform, it's just because who you are. God created you. You're God's child. So it's a very atzmizdika thing, in a sense, Malchus. So on one hand, it doesn't have the Giluim, but it has the Etzem, which we're going to learn about. That's what he's going to explain how Malchus is really an Atzmi, but an Atzmi without those Giluim. So,
But that's a koyach me'anefesh.
hold on.
Koyach nivdal me'anefesh. Is this coming from the nefesh, but it's not a gilui, or it's...
what's that? Let me, I don't want to lose my train of thought. Let me finish 2 more lines and I'll stop for questions. So this is the difference between Malchus and the other faculties. So then he says, Arzeu bigiluyim min hanefesh. In this case, it sounds like Malchus is lower than the other spheres. And indeed it is. It's the lowest sphere. Because in Giluyim, Malchus doesn't have a Gilui. It's not revealing anything. It's not revealing a particular expression of like Chesed Gvura. But Avol, be'etzem hanefesh. But if you want to talk etzem hanefesh, the core of the soul, Hinemidas hamalucha mushrish be'etzem hanefesh, yesem ekol hakeches. The Midas HaMalucha is rooted in the core of the soul more than the other faculties. Because like I just said, it's not about what you do, of what you accomplish or what you express. It's just what it is. And in that sense, Malchus reveals the etzem, that's hisnasus, that's beyond, as opposed to something that's expressed. It's basically different to Giluyim and etzem. That's what he's really explaining right here. And we're going to stop here learning inside. I'm going to take questions, but obviously it's going to lead to why Malchus is the creator of existence, and the higher faculties, the other faculties, the midas are not. But he didn't get to there yet because we haven't finished the subject. But I'll stop here, and anybody has any questions, go ahead.
Koyach nivdal me'hanefesh means that this is also coming me'hanefesh, but it's not megaled the mahus from the nefesh. And the melucha is also not megaled the mahus from the nefesh, but it's a koyach nivdal. It's also a koyach from the nefesh, but it's a koyach nivdal. Correct?
Well, I wouldn't say mahus nefesh. It is an expression of mahus and etzem nefesh. It's not expression of a gili hanefesh. Nivdal, the difference between nivdal and not nivdal is chesed, when you're giving love, that's not nivdal from the nefesh, because the nefesh is expressing itself through love. But when midas hamalucha, the nefesh is not expressing any revealed state. So it's removed because it's not a gili. It's not like Oyer HaShemesh reveals the Shemesh. So it's not nivdal. But let's say the sun gives off other rays that you don't see. So that's nivdal because they're not revealing in a revealed way. They're coming from the Shemesh, but they're not in a Oyer and Moyer type of relationship.
I understand. How would you define nivdal? Koyach nivdal.
I just said to you. Gilui,
yeah.
Sunlight is never nivdal. It's connected to the sun and reveals the sun. But if the sun sent off something that's not light, that affects us, and you don't see it, that would be essentially nivdal because you don't see its direct link between the source and that which is emanating from the source.
That means that this is a koyach nivdal that comes also mehanefesh. It's not nivdal mehanefesh.
That's obvious. It's coming from the nefesh,
Okay.
but it comes in the form of nivdal, not like oyer and moyer, but more like just as an expression of something that you don't see the connection to the source because you don't see any gilui. But like we just said, it connects to the etzem nefesh. So giluyim, it's not a gili, but it connects to the etzem more than the other faculties. That was the last line we just learned. Any other questions?
Yeah, the level you mentioned the hod and the hadar. The hadar is mulka. In a sense, it's an expression because you could the commanding of a king is not as because it's nivdal in the state of nivdal, he can be he can command you. That's sort of the hadar. That's the relationship, and that's showing what he is more than the level of hod, like you mentioned for the atik and arich.
Well, first of all, he's not talking about atik and arich. I just gave it to help understand this. If it's confusing matters, don't use that. Then just let's focus what he says here. I don't like to bring things and that creates more confusion. I was trying to bring more clarity. So what's your question exactly?
It really wasn't a question. It was a comment that there is. I mean, that maybe there is a certain relationship with the lowers. That's not within.
It's a relationship, but not one of giluyim. There's no revelation. There's no expression of love. There's no expression of the soul's revealed faculties.
But there is expression of power.
That's not what Malchus is. Not about power. It's about being completely beyond.
Being subservient to the melech.
Well, that's not what he's saying. Malchus here is just that you know that he's beyond. He's my king, and that's it. I mean, do you call that giluyim? That's not called gili in the mimer here. That's called that it's not a revealed faculty. You're not seeing anything about God. You're just seeing that he's beyond us.
The hadar part is not something.
I don't want to use hadar and hoid right now because he doesn't use it here. Let's use the language from this mimer. Chesed kindness. Malchus does not reveal anything about the king. He's just your king. He's just higher than you. That's the simple explanation. So Malchus doesn't reveal anything about the personality of God. It just tells us that he's our king. He's above us, beyond us. That's all. If you want to call that revelation, a revelation of God's beyond, fine. But that's an atzmistic thing as opposed to when God does kindness for you, you're seeing God's kindness. It's appreciating God for what he is or for what he does. That's why I was expressed. What he expresses himself through chesed gvura, that's the midas. Malchus is for what he is.
You're cutting out now.
That's the difference. And that's a qualitative difference. It's not just quantitative. It's it's appreciating God for what he is beyond us, whereas the midas of God are appreciating God for his beauty and his expression and revealed expression. That's essentially what he said here, different terms. Okay?
Yeah, beautiful. The first time I ever got an idea of what Malchus is.
Yeah. Well, he's still not finished. We'll learn more. Any other comments, questions, anything? Okay. So we're obviously in the middle of the topic. He didn't finish it. We're literally at the bottom of page 1214.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'm just seeing the next point he's going to make sounds like what I already said. So we're going to have to distinguish.
Thank you, Rabbi.
What? Hello? I can't hear. What? Okay. So we're stopping here at the bottom of